Amalia's punishment. But not long afterwards, we were overwhelmed with questions from all sides about the story of the letter. We were visited by friends and enemies, acquaintances and complete strangers. Not one of them stayed for any length of time, and our best friends were the quickest to go. Laysmen, usually so slow and dignified, came in hastily, as if only to see the size of the room. One look around and he was gone. It was like a horrible kind of children's game when he fled, and father, shaking himself free from some other people, ran after him to the very door and then gave it up. Brunswick came and gave notice. He said quite honestly that he wanted to set up in business for himself. A shrewd man, he knew how to seize the right moment. Customers came and hunted round father's storeroom for the boots that they had left to be repaired. At first, father tried to persuade them to change their minds, and we all backed him up as much as we could. But later he gave it up, and without saying a word, helped them to find their belongings. Line after line in the order book was cancelled. The pieces of leather people had left with us were handed back. All debts owing us were paid. Everything went smoothly without the slightest trouble. They asked for nothing better than to break every connection with us, quickly and completely. Even if they lost by it, that counted for nothing. And finally, as we might have foreseen, Seaman appeared, the captain of the fire brigade. I can still see the scene before me. Seaman, tall and stout, but with a stoop from weakness in the lungs. A serious man who could never laugh, standing in front of my father whom he admired, whom he had promised in confidence to make a deputy captain, and to whom he had now to say that the brigade required his services no longer, and asked for the return of his diploma. All the people who happened to be in our house left their business for the moment and crowded round the two men. Seaman found it difficult to speak and only kept on tapping father on the shoulder, as if he were trying to tap out of him the words he ought to say and couldn't find. And he kept on laughing, probably to cheer himself a little and everybody else. But since he's incapable of laughing, and no one had ever heard him laugh, it didn't occur to anybody that he was really laughing. But father was too tired and desperate after the day he had to help anybody out. He looked even too tired to grasp what was happening. We were all in despair too, but being young, didn't believe in the completeness of our ruin, and kept on expecting that someone in the long procession of visitors would arrive and put a stop to it all and make everything swing the other way again. In our foolishness, we thought that Seaman was that very man. We were all keyed up, waiting for his laughter to stop and for the decisive statement to come out at last. What could he be laughing at, if not at the stupid injustice of what has happened to us? Oh, Captain, Captain, tell them now at last, we thought, and pressed close to him. But that only made him recoil away from us in the most curious way. At length, however, he did begin to speak, in response not to our secret wishes, but to the encouraging or angry cries of the crowd. Yet still we had hopes. He began with great praise for our father, called him an ornament to the brigade, an inimitable model to posterity, an indispensable member whose removal must reduce the brigade almost to ruin. That was all very fine had he stopped there, but he went on to say that in spite of that, the brigade had decided, only as a temporary measure of course, to ask for his resignation. They would all understand the seriousness of the reason which forced the brigade to do so. Perhaps if father had not distinguished himself so much at the celebration of the previous day, it would not have been necessary to go so far. But his very superiority had drawn official attention to the brigade and brought it into such prominence that the spotlessness of its reputation was more than ever a matter of honor to it. And now that a messenger had been insulted, the brigade couldn't help itself. And he, Seaman, found himself in the difficult position of having to convey its decision. He hoped that father would not make it any more difficult for him. Seaman was glad to have got it out. He was so pleased with himself that he even forgot his exaggerated tact and pointed to the diploma hanging on the wall and made a sign with his finger. Father nodded and went to fetch it, but his hands trembled so much that he couldn't get it off the hook. I climbed on a chair and helped him. From that moment he was done for. He didn't take the diploma out of its frame, but handed the whole thing over to Seaman. Then he sat down in a corner and neither moved nor spoke to anybody. And we had to attend to the last people there by ourselves, as well as we could. And where do you see in all this the influence of the castle? Asked Kay. So far it doesn't seem to have come in. What you've told me about is simply the ordinary senseless fear of the people, malicious pleasure in hurting a neighbor, specious friendship, things that can be found anywhere. And, I must say, on the part of your father, at least, so it seems to me, a certain pettiness. For what was the diploma? Merely a testimonial to his abilities. These themselves weren't taken from him. If they made him indispensable, so much the better. And the one way he could have made things difficult for the captain would have been by flinging the diploma at his feet before he had said 2 words. But the significant thing to me is that you haven't mentioned Amalia at all. Amalia, who was to blame for everything, apparently stood quietly in the background and watched the whole house collapse.